We promised to talk about one of the things that whenever you seem to talk about it, you fall into heresy or confusion, which is the Trinity. And then relate that to Hegel's notion of reason and intelligibility. This is a topic in which it's not possible to talk about it without doing some abstract thought. I apologize for that because sometimes people, I get it. James Filler, Heidegger, Neoplatonism and the History of Being. And the subtitle is very important for our discussion, Relation as Ontological Ground. For those of you who don't want to read an entire book, and it's not cheap either, relationality as the ground of being, the one as pure relation in Heidegger. So relationality as the ground of being, the one as pure relation in Heidegger. So the argument is this. The argument is, it takes as a presupposition that there really are relations. So it then asks the question, well, what's the relationship between relations and relata? And Filler is arguing that what Plotinus and the Neoplatonists are arguing is that relationality is actually ultimate and the relata emerge out of the relationality rather than how we typically think, prototypically in nominalism, which is there are the things that independently exist and either the relations emerge between them ontologically or where they are given to them by our mind, nominalism. And Filler goes through why that's both of those are extremely problematic. And then he pushes towards that relation can't be a property of either one of the relata. It can't be something we just assign, etc. And then what he then argues is, okay, you take that basic notion and then you take it into some really almost operatic points in Plato, in the Sophist and the Parmenides, where he's wrestling with the problem of the one and the many. And Plato actually comes to the conclusion explicitly that being is somehow both one and many. And then Filler plays with that and says, look, the way to understand how it can be one and many is that relationality is the ultimate ground of being. Now, this has some great advantages to it. What Filler argues is that Christianity is actually arguing that relationality is the nature of ultimacy, and that the Trinity properly understood that. All the terms in the Trinity are inherently relational terms. The relations have to be essential to the persons. They have to be what you would call internal relations. If they're external relations, we get actually a multiple God and all kinds of arguments like this. The notion of God as being inherently relational is very, I would say, orthodox in the sense that it goes with the identity statements made about God in the Bible. God is love, God is light. These are both inherently relational, where light is meant as that which, as the intelligibility between things. Logos is inherently relational. You better believe logos is inherently relational, right? So it would really help to explain the Trinity. Another advantage of this is it helps us to understand the transcendentals, which are taken to be the most proper relations of God, the true, the good, and the beautiful. These are all inherently relational. And to put an even stronger point on it, the classical Orthodox doctrine is that they are convertible, which means the relationship between them are internal relations, right? They all completely interpenetrate each other, but they're not reducible. So interpenetrating and not reducible, inherently relational. And it also helps to explain how intelligibility and information, which are inherently relational in nature, actually can be conforming to being, why they're somehow one but not logically identical. This wedding of intelligibility and being, the fundamental insight that goes back to Parmenides. Well, because they are both inherently relational and they are inherently in relation. And so that is powerful. And then Hegel's sociality of rationality, the idea that the inherent sociality of rationality is actually grounded in the inherent relationality of being and intelligibility themselves. And in that sense, we can make sense of Hegel's sort of objective or absolute idealism and how it grounds rationality. And then, of course, that can also be seen in Whitehead, who makes a very similar kind of argument in Process and Reality. We can make sense of a lot of things. You can see why I think this is a very amazing book. And I think it gives us a wonderful framing for exploring the Trinity.
It has seemed to me that the Christian revelation of the Trinity, which is, in a certain sense unanticipated, brings a remarkable clarity to all sorts of intellectual aporia and confusions and dilemmas and problems along the way. And at the heart of it, if you were to simply think about, that the revelation of the Trinity has significant. I think it's really important to say it has not only philosophical significance, it also has theological significance, spiritual significance, and all of these need to be held together. But it does have an philosophical import. We tend to think that if something is relational, in order to emphasize the relationality of being, we somehow have to downplay the absoluteness of individuality or something like that. That these things, we have to compromise the integrity of individual things in order to affirm their relationality. So we say things are in relation, and that means we have to understand that things are sort of part of a bigger process. And the temptation is then to dissolve their integrity. And then you generate a reaction that says, no, we have to affirm that things are real in themselves and have their own integrity. And then we're led to downplay their relationality as something.
That's right.
Yeah, and what the Trinity says is that absolute individual identity is perfectly coincident with total and complete relationality.
Right.
This insight always comes as a revelation.
Yeah.
One sees it as a kind of a surprise. That was the main point that I wanted to make. Now, one can then ask about the sort of historical emergence of it, and that becomes a different question. But the main point is that there's something about the kind of the paradox that is essentially revelatory. One of the things that we're sort of gesturing towards here is this notion of a radical reciprocity.
Yes.
Interdependence. Yes. And it's the very nature of an interdependence that you can't start with one thing and then
exactly.
Or then deny that and start with the other and then add the one thing. There's somehow it's the very nature of this interdependence that it emerges as an event. There's a kind of event-like, and again, revelation. One sees this in Heraclitus very clearly. I think found insight into that kind of.
Well, and Parmenides too. He has the vision.
Absolutely. Right? You're right.
Right. I mean, I think Hegel is the maestro of trying to make us understand this.
What Hegel does is, he says, okay, but the one thing that Boehme missed is that it's not just an image of God. Like all of reality is not just an image of God. It's an image of the Trinitarian God. So he adds the Trinitarian notion as the decisive thing, and that's, so when I said that, he recognized the philosophical implications of this religious mystery. I mean, I think that can be demonstrated pretty clearly in his thought, the role that this plays, even though some interpretations of Hegel really marginalize it. But for him, it's that there is no that thought. I mean, it's the various things, John, that you laid out earlier. All these things are fundamentally relational, and if you attempt to pull something out and absolutize it, you're going to falsify the whole. So whenever we try to understand any particular thing, we understand it in its relation to other things, and ultimately in its relation to everything.
Yes.
And that means for Hegel now that we have to see it as part of a larger process, you might say.
Historical cultural process.
Historical cultural process. So this is one of his ideas, that truth is always it's a result. That for Hegel, that's the thing. You don't know what an idea is until you've thought through all of its implications and then come back to from the idea. I like to contrast Hegel on this point with this French poet Charles Péguy, who says everything is at the beginning. Hegel says everything is at the end. He says, in a way, everything is at the beginning. That childhood, there's a kind of a fullness and wealth in the beginning. And I want to say that they're both right.
Yeah.
And if you simply affirm one without the other, you're going to run into difficulty.
Well, you're losing the relationality, actually.
Yeah, there you go. There you go. Yeah, that's interesting. Revelation has a kind of a surprise character to it. It's not simply the result of a deduction. It's something that you encounter that, in a way, encounters you. There's a certain priority of the other. You can think of Hegel as having this extraordinary sort of voracious intellectual appetite.
Yes.
There's no mystery that is not meant to be appropriate. It seems to me this is where you see the danger of Hegel. In the end, he wants there to be no mystery left. For Hegel to say that there's somehow a mystery remains ultimate is to say that you're abandoning the nature of reason. This is why Hegel says, in the end, God is mysterious when he reveals himself, but in the end, we're meant to ideally exhaust the mystery in our appropriation of it. And when he says that philosophy begins as love of wisdom, but in the end, it's meant to be just wisdom and not love of, because love implies that you haven't completed it yet. And it seems to me that that's very different from Plato, who recognizes that abiding in and with a mystery is part of the very nature of reason. And in Plato, you have a much more generous affirmation, both of the continual surprise, wonder, and it's a wonder that's not, as you said, John. It's not. It's intelligible.
Yeah.
It's always intelligible, but that doesn't mean exhaustible through our reasoning in a way that would then finally bring it to a close.
What you're saying is no. Hegel thinks in principle.
Yeah.
It's only for reason. Yeah, right. In principle, right, it's exhaustible. It's just in practicality and our finitude, right, blah, blah, blah. But you're saying, when Plato is saying in principle, the mystery is inexhaustible. Our primary mark of realness is inexhaustible intelligibility. We get a sense of intelligibility, but we get a sense that from which intelligibility is emerging is properly mysterious to us because it is in principle exhaustible. If we can exhaust something, that's typically we realize, oh, this is a dream.
Yeah.
Oh, this is a dream. Yeah. Right? This is not a profound work of art. That's all? That's it? Well, Plotinus seems to be making that argument about the inexhaustibleness of the one. And secondly, the argument that the source, and by the word source or ground are both inherently relational terms, don't think of them as things, right? That the source of intelligibility is not itself directly intelligible, right?
See, I think that's the point that Hegel would just say no to. My sense is, so this is why, if you take for granted a basic assumption, I think he makes an incredibly compelling case. So when I say this, I don't mean to be dismissive of Hegel. I think there's extraordinary. I consider him one of the greatest philosophers of all time. I have deep respect. So I don't mean this, in a short conversation to go immediately to a problem.
Yeah.
Sounds like you're dismissing the person. Yeah.
I share that with you. He's one of the greats.
I don't know that Hegel would, and so it's Hegel in the end is an Aristotelian more than a Platonist.
Yes.
And when Aristotle articulates his notion of God, he wants to say God is pure actuality, and that means the highest kind of actuality. What's the highest kind of activity? It's thinking. And so, but thinking about what's best, and we just said what's best is thinking. So it's thinking upon thinking, that includes all possible thoughts and so forth. But it's interesting that Plotinus, centuries later, in his appropriation of the philosophical tradition, he says, well, Plato actually has a deeper insight into than Aristotle into the nature of God, because for Aristotle, thought thinking itself, that's a unified multiplicity, a perfectly unified multiplicity. One in unity and difference are perfectly unified, but that presupposes a principle that enables it. That is,
Yes, exactly.
totally. So yeah, and you know, as you said, that the source of intelligibility is not itself intelligible in the same way as the things that it makes intelligible, right? That's the insight that you don't have in Aristotle, it seems to me, and then eventually in Hegel. You know, very, very profound thinkers. But that's, and you can see for Hegel, he says, he actually he turns Plato against himself. He says, well, Plato says that God is good and is jealous, and is not jealous, therefore wants to share his goodness. But Hegel says, well, this means that if God reserves any mystery for himself that he is not making known and offering for appropriation, it means that God is not generous.
Yeah.
So for Hegel, the perfect ideal intelligibility of God coincides with generosity. Right. And it seems to me, from this the Christian Neoplatonic tradition, you would want to say, no, it's more paradoxical. Perfect generosity, when God gives himself away totally, he doesn't become less himself. He remains radically transcendent, and that's and so that total kenosis and self-offering to appropriation and the absolute mystery of the inner life of God, those things coincide. And there you have the difference, I think.